But Troy Dannen has had quite the odyssey in the past 7 months. He was Tulane's athletic director for a very long time. He was trying to get a power conference job. He finally lands one at Washington. Washington then goes to the national title game in football. His coach, Kalen DeBoer, leaves for Alabama. He hires Jed Fish from Arizona as the new coach. And then he fires Mike Hopkins as the men's basketball coach. So very busy time at Washington for Troy Dannen. You notice I didn't say who he hired to replace Mike Hopkins because before he could do that, he got hired away at Nebraska to replace Trev Alberts, who had gone to Texas A&M. I know that's all very confusing. You got all that. I feel like I need the crime scene board here to explain all of it. But long story short, Troy Dannen was at Tulane, went to Washington. Now he's at Nebraska. And he had his introductory press conference in Lincoln and was taking questions from the media on Tuesday. It was very interesting to hear Troy Dannen talk. And Troy has always been a pretty forward-thinking guy. I actually felt a little bad when I made fun of Troy on Twitter when he left Washington for Nebraska, because I said, we really got to stop these guys from just hopping into the transfer portal again. And it was we're making Caden Proctor jokes at that point. But Troy has always been a little more forward-thinking as far as ADs go. He was one of the early proponents of changing the transfer rules to make them a little more fair to the players. So he's probably not the guy to be making fun of for that, to be calling a hypocrite there. But he's the one who gets caught in that crossfire because he did only stay at Washington for a few months. And, I think we'll find out how that works out, why that particular move was made. Washington has already replaced Troy Dannen. Pat Chun, who was at Washington State, is now moving to Washington. And this is one of those that you kind of knew that the best people at Oregon State and Washington State, once the Pac-12 dissolved, you knew they were probably going to be going elsewhere. You saw Jonathan Smith leave Oregon State for Michigan State as the football coach. Pat Chun, who did a great job as AD at Washington State, he's off to become the new AD at Washington, replacing Troy Dannen. Now, I think Pat will be a pretty forward-thinking AD at Washington. He's been in the Big Ten before. He was at Ohio State as an assistant AD. Troy, though, he is what your AD should probably sound like these days. I want you to listen to some of the things that Troy Dannen said in that introductory press conference in Nebraska. And I want you to ask yourself, is my school's AD thinking this way? Is he talking this way? Because if he's not, or she, then you probably have a problem. You either already know you have a problem or you're about to have a problem in the next 2-3 years. So I want you to listen to what Troy Dannen said. And we'll start with a question from Steve Sipple of On3's Husker Online, asking Troy about the relationship between the athletic department and the collective.
You mentioned the collective. Why do you feel it's important in your role to have a relationship with that collective?
Because the number one commitment to success is to the student athlete. And as I mentioned, in the day, that might have been providing a strength coach. In the day, that might have been a laptop. In the day, that might have been a coach who was going to prepare them for the next level. In the day. Today's day is there is a sharing of resources with the student athletes. And so if we're going to compete, if we're going to recruit and retain, everybody in this department has to support what lies ahead for student athletes to be a part of the economic model of this. Today, it's NIL. Tomorrow, it's going to be something different, and we will pivot and evolve into that. But so it would not, I would be missing if I tried to avoid the reality of what the name of the game is today.
In the day, it was a strength coach. Kind of a shout out to the history of Nebraska. Boyd Epley, the original college strength coach, invented the entire genre. But Troy Dannen's right about this. If you are not thinking along these lines, if you are not thinking about how you can help your collective better retain, recruit athletes, and yes, they can recruit them now because right now there's an injunction. There are essentially no NIL rules. then you are behind. You are not where you need to be. Your athletic department leadership is not thinking the way it needs to think. It is not understanding where things are going. And what's interesting is there's a big stadium renovation project that is in the works at Nebraska. And that's something that they've been talking about a lot over the last few years. Well, Troy Dannen got asked about that as well, and his answer was very telling.
The stadium renovation project, what do you know about it? What do you like? What can you share about plans for that?
Yeah, I really don't know anything about it, quite honestly. I read, when it comes across the ticker in the morning, right? You read about it, but I don't know the fundamentals. It will be something that I have to get myself up to speed on very, very quickly. I think I have some meetings as early as Thursday, starting to try to learn a little bit about it. I will say this, and it's true with anything. If it helps us win, great. If it doesn't help us win, I want to win. And so the assessment of anything that we do, stadium, any facility, any infrastructure, any person we hire, any dollar we invest, does it help us win? Does it help us win academically? Does it help us win socially? Or does it help us win on the field? Those are the criteria by which every dollar we spend should be measured.
That's what I've been saying. If you've been watching this show, I've said multiple times over the past year, the best way to improve your stadium is to put better players in it. If you think you need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on nicer seats, you are wasting hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, that doesn't mean you should never try to improve your stadium. You should never do any of these projects. In fact, this Nebraska project, I believe, is similar to the one that they're undertaking at Kansas right now, where they've already earmarked the money. They've got the money. And there's going to be more to it. There's retail. There's maybe a hotel. Like at the Kansas one, there will be retail, a hotel. There will be other things that the university can use to derive revenue from what you're building there. But if you're building something that only helps you 7 Saturdays a year and doesn't help you actually win the game, if it just makes somebody's tushy a little more comfortable as they watch the game, that is probably not going to help you, because winning football games with better players that you have to now pay for, that is the way you do it. That is the way you increase donations. That is the way you increase fan happiness. Yes, the tushy may be happy with the cushioned seat and the seat back, the chair back, but every part of the body's happier with a win. And that is what Troy Dannen has to deal with at Nebraska. Remember, this is a program that has not made a bowl game since 2017. They've got to figure it out. You've heard from Matt Rule multiple times in this show. We talked to Sean Callahan and Steve Sipple from Husker Online. They've explained where Nebraska's at. The passion is there. The money's there. They do seem to prioritize NIL and did before Trev Alberts left. But you've heard this from Troy Dannen now. They're going to be putting the money into the things that matter, or driving the money toward the stuff that actually matters. Because right now, you've got to tell your donors, hey, don't give it to us. Give it to the collective. And that's got to be incredibly hard for ADs who grew up in the business asking for money, saying, give it to us. Tax deductible, give it to us. We'll figure it out. You give it to us. That's not it anymore. At the moment, the collectives are the ones that pay the players. If you want better players, your collective needs to be funded better. And so that's how you've got to figure it out. And if it means a stadium renovation project is not as grandiose as you expected, or gets put off for a little bit, or changes, so be it. If the team in the stadium is winning, you'll have more money later on to do an even bigger stadium renovation project. That's the key. It's not the only, Nebraska's not the only school where that's a thing. There's quite a few schools. JD and I talked about Florida, where they are kicking around the idea of a major renovation to Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. I'm telling you right now, if they would like to make Ben Hill Griffin Stadium nicer, they need to fund the collective to put better players in it. That will make it nicer. If they want to make Memorial Stadium nicer in Lincoln, fund the collective. Put the best players possible in it. That's the way to do it. And it seems like Troy Dannen understands that. It seems like that's his priority. I mean, that answer about the stadium project, you would have never heard that from an athletic director 5 years ago. That an athletic director would have been crazy to say that 5 years ago, because it's essentially saying, give it to them, don't give it to me. Give it to them. But that's how it goes. And the other thing that I thought was interesting that Troy Dannen said is he understands that that may not be how that works forever. And probably sooner rather than later, that's going to change, where it won't be give it to them. It will be give it to me, but instead of me giving it to the coaches or me giving it to tearing down this perfectly good facility and rebuilding a nicer facility with some waterfalls, the school will be giving it to the players. And they've got to figure out how to do that in the best way that brings the most talent. Whether there's limits on what you can give or not, that would provide another wrinkle. But you've got to be able to spend it wisely, because the idea is to win. And especially at Nebraska, where they have not won, where they're used to winning, but it's been a long time. Let's hear Troy Dannen's probably most telling answer.
The one thing that's absolute that's going to happen, there will be a line item in our budget for student athletes at some point in time. And I don't know what form that takes. I don't know whether the courts and or legislators force that on us. I don't know how much of it is we will be proactive and put that plan in place ourselves as an enterprise. But that will be coming. And it is not optional. And I talked a lot about NIL today in 1890. That is what NIL will transition into. And we better be supporting it to the max today, because as we transition, we will be supporting it to the max tomorrow. I said this earlier, and I hate to repeat myself, but we've always focused on coach recruitment and retention and how important that is. People. Time to focus on student athlete recruitment and retention. And it's a different model. Some people don't like it. And those who don't want to embrace it, that's fine. I know this, we will embrace it, because that is when I say the price of success, coaches' contracts, price of success. And we will be able to pay the price for success.
So, again, if your athletic director doesn't sound like this, if they're not talking like this, if they are one of the people who has a problem with it that Troy Dannen was talking about, you have a problem. Your school has a problem. If your athletic director does not sound like that, you're about to get left behind, or maybe you already have been left behind. But that is reality. That is realism from somebody who's been grinding away at the Group of Five level for a long, long time, who understood that change was coming and saw it from a place where it was going to be more difficult to deal with. Like, it's way easier for Troy Dannen to deal with these changes at Nebraska than it would have been if he'd still been at Tulane. So I think there's an appreciation of that when you hear him talk about it. But what he's saying is they're going to be paying the athletes directly. It's happening. It's coming. He doesn't know how it's coming. It may come from the courts. It may come because the schools actually decided to do something proactive for once and figure it out themselves. But it's coming. So it's good to hear this out loud. This is stuff that athletic directors have been saying quietly for the past 3-4 years, really since NIL came into existence. It's nice that someone at a big school is now saying it out loud. There are others who feel this way, and there are others who say it out loud now. But the majority still don't want to say this out loud. The majority still want to pretend that there's a chance they can go back to the old way, at least publicly. Privately, almost everybody accepts that things are about to change dramatically, and they better be ready for it. But at least we know Nebraska has an AD who understands things are about to change dramatically and seems to be preparing for that. Now, that said, Nebraska still has to win games in football. They've got a men's basketball team that's never won an NCAA tournament game. They made it this year. So all of this stuff has to actually be brought to fruition by Troy Dannen, by Matt Rule, by Fred Hoiberg, by all the people who are tasked with bringing it to fruition. But at least everybody seems to be on the same page, pulling in the same direction. That's a very good start. And again, go back and listen to what Troy Dannen said. If your AD doesn't sound like that, you got a problem. Big problem. And it may be time to start thinking about doing something else. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.